All right, let's dive in. Today we're taking a look at a research paper, and it connects some pretty out there stuff like underground water, electromagnetic forces, even those tingling sensations like what you mentioned, experiencing while hiking near flowing water.
Yeah, this paper, Geophysical Phononic Energy as a Source of Biophysical Effects. It's a mouthful, right?
It is.
It was presented back in 1977 by Zenon Urbanski. He was a Polish researcher. He specialized in dowsing and hydroeconomics, which is, the study of water resources and their use. But it's really interesting how he connects something as basic as underground water flow to these, kind of extraordinary biophysical effects.
And you know me, anything that even hints at fringe science, especially when it involves weird sensations, I'm all in.
Right.
So where do we even begin with this one?
Well, Urbanski's main argument, it all comes down to this idea that underground water, as it flows through the Earth's crust, it's like a natural energy source. And it's not just the water itself. It's how it interacts with everything around it, right? So underground water, it often contains ferromagnetic substances. Meaning they're strongly attracted to magnets. So picture this. These substances, as the water flows through cracks and fissures in the rock, they amplify something called the Quincke effect.
The Quincke effect.
You got it. Think of it like this. The water flow, combined with all those magnetic substances, it creates these tiny little electrical currents.
Okay, staying with you so far.
Yeah.
But how do they translate to, tingling sensations or those other strange effects? That seems like a big leap.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
Golly.
These electrical currents, right, they get all mixed up with the Earth's magnetic field, and they generate this special kind of wave called a magnetohydrodynamic wave, or MHD wave for short.
Wait, MHD waves, I thought those were like a space thing, something you'd find in the sun's atmosphere, not underground.
You're totally right. They're typically observed in cosmic plasma, which is that superheated electrically charged gas, what stars are made of.
Yeah.
But Urbanski's idea, it was that a similar kind of wave, but on a much smaller scale, could be happening right under our feet because of that interaction between the flowing water and the Earth's magnetic field.
Okay, my mind's starting to make some connections here. Remember when you told me about that strange humming sound you heard near that old well? And how some people had seen, weird lights in the same area?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, could this be related to those MHD waves Urbanski's talking about?
That's a fascinating thought, and it actually lines up with some of the things Urbanski suggested. He specifically focused on a particular range of these MHD waves, those with wavelengths between 40 and 60 micrometers. He argued that they're incredibly difficult to stop. They can travel long distances without losing much energy at all. And here's the really interesting part. He proposed that these waves, which he also called phononic waves, carry this unique type of energy, and he called it phononic energy.
Wait, hold on. Phononic energy.
Yeah.
That sounds like something straight out of Star Trek. What is that exactly?
He described it as a kind of quantum of electronic excitation generated by the interplay of the water molecules, the rock crystals, and the Earth's magnetic field.
Okay. Still with you.
It's a little complex, but imagine it like this. The water molecules are vibrating, right? And that's influenced by the magnetic field. And those vibrations create disturbances in the surrounding rock crystals. These disturbances then release a very specific type of energy, and that's what he called phononic energy. And he believed that this energy carried by those MHD waves could actually have profound effects on living organisms.
So are you saying these phononic waves with the special energy they carry, could they interact with our body, maybe even cause those tingling sensations we were talking about?
Exactly. And not just tingling. He proposed a whole range of biophysical effects. He even suggested things like involuntary muscle contractions.
Now that is wild, to think that it could all stem from something as, I don't know, seemingly ordinary as underground water flow.
Right.
But here's the big question, right? Could these phononic waves, with their ability to travel so far and maybe interact with living organisms, could they be a factor in unexplained aerial phenomena, UAPs?
No, that is a very interesting question.
Right.
But it takes us deep into speculation territory. Urbanski, he didn't specifically talk about UAPs in this paper, but remember those strange lights you mentioned that people saw near the well?
Yeah.
Well, he did observe some pretty interesting optical effects in the infrared range.
Okay.
Which is, the same range that's often associated with heat and night vision technology. And it was above water flows that he was seeing these things. And we know there are a lot of UAP reports that describe these objects with unusual luminosity, sometimes in that same infrared spectrum. So while he didn't directly link phononic waves to UATs, it's definitely an interesting avenue for speculation, especially given those optical effects that he observed.
Okay, hold on. So you're saying it's possible that those lights and maybe even other UAP phenomena could be connected to these phononic waves generated by underground water.
It's a possibility worth considering, especially since those waves can travel so far without losing energy.
Yeah.
And we know that a lot of UAP reports, they cluster around bodies of water, both above ground and potentially underground.
This is incredible. We're talking about a potential link between underground water, strange lights, electromagnetic forces, maybe even UAPs. We have to dig into this more.
We absolutely do. There's so much more to unpack here. And remember, Urbanski was a dowsing expert, and he believed this research on phononic energy could explain how dowsing might actually work.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. All right, let's get into that connection next. This is getting good.
So before we got into all this phononic energy stuff, you mentioned you'd had some pretty weird experiences yourself, the near bodies of water. Tell me more about those.
Well, there's this one time I was hiking near this waterfall, and I swear I felt this like pressure change. It was almost like my ears were popping, but I wasn't changing altitude or anything, and it wasn't just me. Other people in the group felt it too.
Interesting. And this waterfall, it was near a cave system, right?
Yeah, it was.
That detail could actually be pretty significant when you consider Urbanski's work. He specifically mentions caves as places where these phononic waves could be amplified, because of the enclosed space and the water flowing through those underground channels.
Okay, now that is creepy.
Yeah.
Are you saying that weird pressure feeling could have been like those phononic waves messing with my body? But how is that even possible? And what about those strange lights people have reported seeing? How could those be connected?
Well, Urbanski, he thought these phononic waves could potentially interact with the electromagnetic fields around us, including the ones generated by, the human nervous system.
Yeah.
He didn't have all the answers, and some of his ideas were definitely on the fringe of science, but he was really trying to bridge the gap between these seemingly separate worlds, the traditional scientific world and the more esoteric one.
I get it. He was trying to find a scientific explanation for stuff that usually gets written off as like paranormal or just plain crazy. But what about those lights? You're not saying he thought those were caused by phononic waves, are you?
I wouldn't go that far, but he did observe some interesting optical effects, especially in the infrared spectrum, above water flows.
Okay.
And remember, a lot of those UAP reports, they describe objects with this weird glow to them, and sometimes it's in that same infrared range. So while he didn't explicitly say phononic waves were causing UAPs, it's definitely something interesting to think about, especially because of those optical effects he observed.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So we've got these phononic waves, maybe messing with our bodies, maybe causing those pressure changes and other sensations, and maybe, just maybe, playing a part in those unexplained lights and other UAP stuff. This is a lot to take in. Let's go back to something a little less mind-blowing for a sec, though. Dowsing. You said Urbanski was a dowsing expert, right? And he thought his research on phononic energy could explain how it works.
Exactly. Dowsing, using rods or pendulums to find underground water, it's often been dismissed as like folklore or pseudoscience. But Urbanski, he thought there might actually be a scientific basis for it.
But how could something as simple as a forked stick or a pendulum really detect water underground? It just seems so, I don't know, unscientific.
Well, think about what we've been talking about. Those phononic waves generated by the underground water flow interacting with all those electromagnetic fields around us. Urbanski's idea was that dowsers, maybe without even realizing it, were picking up on subtle changes in those fields, maybe even the phononic waves themselves. And they were using those dowsing rods like a kind of amplifier. Like their bodies were acting like antennas, and the rods were helping them tune in to these tiny energy fluctuations.
Wow, that's actually kind of brilliant. So it's like dowsing is a form of biofeedback, but instead of measuring your heart rate or muscle tension, you're measuring these subtle energy changes in the environment.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it actually lines up with some of the research that's been done on dowsing, which suggests that it might not be just random chance. There could be a real mechanism at play, even though we don't fully understand it yet.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces might fit together now.
Uh,
Underground water creates these phononic waves. They could interact with our bodies, cause weird lights and other UAP stuff, and maybe even be detected by dowsers using those rods and pendulums. It's like this crazy interconnected web of energy and effects that we're just beginning to understand.
and who knows what other mysteries might be hidden within that web. Remember, Urbanski's research, it was presented almost 50 years ago. Imagine what we could discover now with all the technology we have today and a more open-minded approach to these seemingly fringe areas of science.
I'm already feeling inspired to go out and try some dowsing myself, though I gotta admit I'm still a bit skeptical. But that's what's so great about science, right? We question things, we experiment, we explore.
Absolutely. And even if we never completely understand how all these phenomena work, the pursuit of knowledge, the willingness to challenge our own assumptions, that's what pushes us forward.
So where do we go from here? What are
Right.
the next steps in exploring this connection between phononic energy, UAPs, and even dowsing?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to try and replicate Urbanski's research, expand on it, but using modern scientific methods. We need to design experiments that can really test his ideas about phononic energy, how it's generated, how it affects living things, and its possible role in those unexplained events.
That makes sense. We need more data, more evidence to back up his claims, or to prove them wrong, I guess. But how do we even measure something as subtle and hard to pin down as phononic energy?
That's a great question, and it's one that scientists are still trying to figure out. Urbanski, he mentioned using a Golia-type detector in his research, but there aren't a lot of details about it. We need to look into whether the technology we already have, things like sensitive magnetometers or those electromagnetic field detectors, if they could pick up these tiny energy changes. And if not, well, we might have to come up with completely new instruments, specifically designed to detect those phononic waves.
It sounds like we're on the edge of a whole new frontier in science. It's exciting, but it's also kind of daunting to think about how much we don't know yet.
It is daunting, but also incredibly inspiring. Just that we could be on the verge of a major scientific breakthrough, one that could change how we understand energy, consciousness, maybe even the nature of reality itself.
Whoa, that is a lot to process.
Yep.
But it's definitely something to think about. I'm already seeing the world in a new light, or maybe I should say a new energy field. But before we get too carried away with all the possibilities, let's step back for a second and think about some of the other explanations for these phenomena. Because let's be real, not everyone is going to be convinced by Urbanski's ideas, and there might be other factors at play that we haven't even considered.
You're absolutely right. It's important to approach this with a healthy dose of skepticism and to consider all the possible explanations, even the ones that seem, far-fetched or unconventional. After all, that's what real scientific inquiry is all about, right?
So we've spent this deep dive looking into Zenon Urbanski's work, his research on phononic energy. It's fascinating, but kind of out there, right? I mean, we've talked about potential connections to like weird sensations near water, even UAPs. What a ride.
It really has been, but it is important to keep in mind that Urbanski's work, especially his ideas about phononic energy, it's still pretty speculative. Mainstream science isn't totally on board yet.
Right, and we've touched on some alternative explanations, but what are like the main criticisms of Urbanski's ideas? I'm sure there are plenty of skeptics out there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. One of the most common criticisms is that his research, it lacked rigorous testing and verification. Like, remember, his paper was presented at a Congress on psychotronic research.
Yeah.
And that field, well, it's not exactly known for, strict scientific methods.
Yeah, that does kind of raise a red flag, even for me, and I'm pretty open-minded. What else do the critics say?
Well, another issue is that Urbanski didn't really provide a clear, detailed explanation for how these phononic waves could actually interact with living things, to produce those biophysical effects he talked about. He had some general ideas, but they weren't really backed up by solid experimental evidence.
So basically, he had some really interesting observations and hypotheses, but he didn't quite connect all the dots scientifically. I can see why some scientists would be hesitant about his work.
Exactly. And then there's the whole dowsing connection, which is already a pretty controversial topic. A lot of scientists, they just dismiss dowsing as, total bunk. They say there's no way it could possibly work.
But Urbanski suggested that maybe dowsers are picking up on those subtle energy fluctuations. maybe even those phononic waves, right? Without realizing it. Could that be a possible explanation?
It's possible, and some early research hints that, dowsing might not be completely random. But we need much more rigorous controlled studies to know for sure if there's a real measurable effect.
Okay, so it sounds like we still don't have all the answers about Urbanski's ideas. But even if some of his specific claims don't totally hold up, hasn't his work opened up some really exciting possibilities for future research?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most valuable things about Urbanski's work is that it encourages us to think outside the box, to
Yeah.
question those conventional assumptions and to consider that there might be a lot more to the natural world than we realize.
I love that. It's a good reminder that science is all about constant discovery. And sometimes those most groundbreaking ideas, they come from the people who are brave enough to push the boundaries of what's considered, acceptable or even normal.
Exactly. And even if Urbanski's theories about phononic energy turn out to be wrong, the questions he asked, the connections he tried to make, they've started a really interesting conversation in the scientific community. And that conversation is still going on today.
So what's the biggest takeaway you'd want our listeners to get from this deep dive into Urbanski's work? What should they be thinking about after listening to all this?
I think the most important message is to stay curious and open-minded. Those are crucial for scientific progress. Don't be scared to explore unusual ideas, to ask those tough questions, to consider possibilities that might seem strange or even impossible at first.
Couldn't agree more. And who knows, maybe someone listening to this, inspired by Urbanski's pioneering spirit, will make the next big discovery about these mysterious and honestly pretty mind-blowing phenomena.
Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll be back next week with another fascinating topic from the world of, well, the unexplained.
I would have been on top of the charts, but it's politics. You do some gimmick shit and post, you get a lot of clicks. Drop some real shit and they probably won't acknowledge it.